This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's lexipol.com. Hello and welcome back to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and we're going to continue our international theme this week. Last week, if you were listening, I had a great conversation with US-based Ron Duckworth and the inimitable, the one and only Dr. Linda Dykes, and we talked a lot about community paramedicine. We talked about the demise of the ET3 program in the US. And she also highlighted a system and an organization and an agency in the UK that are doing great things. And that organization was the Welsh Ambulance Service NHS Trust. So I immediately jumped on the phone, jumped on all the airwaves and tracked down their chief executive to come and talk to us this week. So we have another international edition. So I'd like to welcome my guest this week, the chief executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust, Professor Jason Killens. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Rob. Good to see you.
Good. First of all, I have to congratulate you because His Majesty the King, recently crowned, had his honours list. And this is a very peculiar British thing. But of course, His Majesty named you in his first honours list and bestowed upon you a King's Ambulance Medal. So congratulations.
Thanks, Rob. He did indeed. But of course, it's, it's recognition of years worth of support, guidance and counsel from colleagues across nearly 3 decades of service. So I'm grateful to His Majesty, but of course it's part of recognition for those that have supported me along the way too.
That's fantastic, Jason, and I wouldn't have expected you to say anything else, and you're quite right. And obviously it's for everybody for that honour. So let's sort of start off with a bio from you. I thought I was an international traveller, and then, of course, for full disclosure, we've known each other for a long, long time. We were both operations directors, would you believe, back 20 odd years ago in the UK. And I went off and went west. You went elsewhere. So give us your backstory, Jason.
Yeah, sure. So, I joined the ambulance sector in the UK, in London, in February 1996. I was an emergency medical technician on the streets in East London, responding to 999 calls, to emergency calls here for about 3 or 4 years. And after that, I came off the road and went into kind of middle management roles. And I finished after 20 years with the London Ambulance Service, as you say, as Executive Director of Operations in September 2015. I went slightly further afield than you and went to Australia for 3 years as Chief Executive of the South Australia Ambulance Service. So that's one of the state services in Australia, and was there for 3 years. And then I returned to the UK in September 2018 to this job here in Wales, where I've been the chief executive now for, just about 5 years next month.
I also want to take us back to, there was a point on the Gold Coast in Australia where our paths crossed, and you were with London, and you were doing the one thing that America now has its eye on, to source medics. And that was, you were in Australia with a team from the London Ambulance Service recruiting Australian paramedics, and I think that was very successful.
It was, and it's something that actually the London Ambulance Service continue today. When I left in 2015, we'd been recruiting internationally for, as you say, from Australia for probably 3 years at that point, 3 or 4 years at that point, and we'd recruited about 500 people from Australia to come to London specifically, work with us in our emergency ambulance workforce. We were doing that because, I guess, for 2 reasons. One was that there was a shortage of paramedics in the UK. We were growing quicker. Organisations were growing quicker than our universities could produce paramedics for us. And secondly, we knew that the Australian market was rich with paramedics that weren't securing jobs in the state ambulance services there, because there was an oversupply coming out of the universities. So it's a great opportunity for those individual paramedics to work internationally, to be supported to do that, to develop and grow their careers in a different system, but also, to help patients in the UK and particularly in London with providing better services.
And that's certainly a model, as I said, that some organizations in the US are following. Some of our bigger ambulance companies have cracked the immigration piece. Of course, what we have to do here is to demonstrate that the incoming professional isn't taking the job of a US citizen. And what we know right now here in the US is that we have a massive shortage of paramedics, or in the wrong locations, shall we say, and therefore that's probably easier to demonstrate. And so, people may come and go, hang on a second, you did it, how do we do it? So stand by for the phone to ring on that one. And of course, if you have been following the EMS One-Stop series out there, everybody, I had the team from Team Australia EMS who have been assisting Australian medics find placements in the US as well. And so go back and look at that. However, in the UK, and of course, this is where, again, Americans need some translation, because we've got England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, British, English. Where does Wales fit into all that?
All right, well, let's help out with that.
Let's do a lesson.
The United Kingdom is made up of 4 countries. So England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. That's what makes up the United Kingdom. In England, there are 10 ambulance services, 10 regional ambulance services in the NHS, or as part of the NHS in England. But in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, there is one national ambulance service for those three nations. So the governance is different. I've got a direct relationship with government and with the health minister of the devolved government here in Wales, and that's the same in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. Whereas in England, those 10 services, 10 regional services, report through an NHS body, NHS England, into government. So different structures, but one ambulance service in Wales, 10 in England.
So what is the population and the area that you're serving, Jason?
Well, I mean, we've got about 3.5 million people, residents in Wales. Obviously, there's a transient population, particularly in the summer, with people on holiday going to coastal areas and so on, particularly in the west and in North Wales.
And don't forget, they're all going to Wrexham from America now, by the way.
Well, they are all going to go to Wrexham. We've got a connection with Wrexham. We've got an ex-player actually from Wrexham who's one of our operational managers with us now. So we've got just a little bit of a connection.
Excellent.
But so 3.5 million people across Wales, across the country. The geographical size is significant. It's much smaller, I have to say, than I had in Australia. But we've got urbanised areas in 4 cities. We've got rural communities, and also some very remote communities, very small remote communities, certainly in mid Wales and up in North Wales, which are particularly difficult to access. So we've got the full mix of, I guess, communities to serve here, and that adds additional complexity to the role.
And again, my commentary for our US friends listening is that that doesn't sound like many ambulance services, but they are very large services compared to that in the US. When I looked last, Jason, I think we counted 15,500 registered ambulance services companies, fire departments that do EMS. And so, that's a lot. And some of them are actually quite small. So in terms of economy of scale, that the UK, the Australian systems actually might have it right. But that's probably a discussion for a whole nother day. Let's talk about the National Health Service. And again, to sort of do some translation, of course, in the UK, healthcare is free at the point of delivery. What does that mean?
Yeah, and that's one of the attractions of it. And indeed, Rob, that's one of the things that drew me back here to the UK from Australia, because many people have said to me, why did you come back from Australia as an expat, on the beach, barbecues every day?
Right.
Why did you come back to the UK? And that's one of the things that drew me back. But the NHS, founded in 1948 by a health minister, actually a Welsh health minister at the time, a chap called Aneurin Bevan. And as you say, its founding principle is that healthcare is free at the point of delivery. Every bit of healthcare is free at the point of delivery for citizens across the United Kingdom. Ambulance services are part of the NHS. Well, that's a much more recent feature. They weren't in 1948. They were run by local councils, local authorities many, many years ago. And over time, ambulance services have come together, as you say, into larger, bigger organisations with a bigger geographical footprint and those economies of scale. So we've got 14 now across the UK. 13 now across the UK. And the NHS, we are part of the NHS, but we also straddle the emergency services, group too. So with police, Coast Guard, mountain rescue, fire services, and so on. So we've got a kind of foot in both camps. So it's absolutely right we're part of the NHS, because most of our work, as will be the same in the US, is a single patient episode of care about providing care to patients. But of course, we work very closely with police and fire, particularly on about 10% of the work we go to. So it's right we also maintain good relationships with the emergency services group as well.
And again, to do a little bit of sort of US translation, that fire brigades or fire departments aren't necessarily associated with medical first response. And so that's probably the exception in the UK rather than the rule.
That's right. So there are some fire services here in the UK that provide immediate medical response as co or first responders, but they're in addition to the ambulance service, which is entirely separate. So here we've got fire services that respond to at some of our low acuity work, so non-injured fallers, say, and there are also fire services across the UK that respond to category 1 or higher priority calls such as cardiac arrests, but they don't routinely respond to the full suite of work, and they certainly don't do it on their own. They're always in addition to an NHS ambulance response.
So in terms of your own service, then, obviously you've mentioned you've got urban, you've got rural, and actually you've got some fantastic mountains. I've climbed a few of them myself over the time. How are you geographically organised and dispersed?
Well, we've got a number of regions. We split our operation into a number of regions across Wales. There are 7 health boards across Wales, and we mirror those geographical footprints. We've got about 110 stations, 110 ambulance stations across Wales, 3 what we call clinical contact centres for our 999 emergency service, and a number of regional kind of administrative headquarters across Wales too. An organisation of about 5,000 staff all up, 700 vehicles, operating all of the emergency 999 service, all of the non-emergency patient transport, so planned, clinics, appointments, and so on. We also operate 111, which here in the UK is a non-urgent advice line or non-emergency advice line for the public to secure or access advice about their condition. So we operate that nationally too.
That's excellent. And also another piece that's very familiar to US listeners is helicopter emergency medical services. And there's a completely different model in the UK, and one which I would rather have, and that they're all, in the main, I think, unless things have changed, charity-based. So it's all done through citizen contribution. There's no massive follow-up bill unless things have changed. And I'm guessing you have a service similar to that in Wales.
We do. So here in Wales, again, as you say, most of the helicopter emergency medical services provided funded by charitable donations. There is some NHS contribution to it here in Wales. A number of aircraft operate from 3 bases across the country, 24/7. Where they can't fly, they respond in vehicles, by road, and part, as you say, part funded by charity, part funded by the NHS. We host in our control rooms, in our contact centres, their activation desks, so they're triage and activation desks. So very closely, connected, but they are separate services to the traditional ambulance service here in the UK.
Excellent. So getting into the kind of meat of the discussion, Jason, the clinical services that you are providing. Let's start with the call center then. The beauty, and you probably found the same, of going to work in another country is the 3-digit number, and the way the call is processed is fairly similar. So that's fairly recognizable technology. In fact, going from the east of England to Richmond, Virginia, the CAD system was the same, the telephony was the same, the Q&A, the Pro QA was the same, albeit in a different accent. And so when I called 999 in the UK, what happens to me?
Well, pretty much the same as it does in the US, Rob, as you described. So you'll be connected, you call 999 or 112. You can use the European number here.
Of course.
Yeah. You will be put through to a British Telecom operator, and they'll ask you which emergency service you want: police, fire, ambulance, Coast Guard. You'll say ambulance. You'll be connected to the nearest ambulance service based on the telephone exchange which you've connected to, or if you're on a mobile phone, it'll be to the nearest, to the cell site that you've connected to. And you'll be asked the same questions as you would in the US. We use MPDS here and ProQA. Some ambulance services in the UK use a different product called NHS Pathways. The clinical triage process is slightly different, but essentially it's the same basic process. Priority or address, telephone number, priority symptoms, advice for over the telephone if that's necessary prior to arrival, and dispatch based on priority of the assessment.
And so the disposal then of the patient, to use that as a polite term, is either an ambulance or some sort of further triage, further interrogation.
So it could be a traditional ambulance, could be a traditional road ambulance. Of course, we've already discussed air ambulance. There could be an air ambulance as well. But increasingly here in Wales and in other services across the UK, you could see a disposal which includes telephone advice by either telephone or video triage and advice from our clinicians in our contact centres. They could be either nurses or paramedics. They're using the sister product to MPDS, which is called ECNS, to undertake that assessment process. And we're closing now here in Wales about 15% of all of our emergency calls every day by way of telephone or video consultation without turning a wheel and sending an ambulance. If we do respond to scene, it could be a traditional ambulance, or increasingly, it could be what we call an advanced paramedic practitioner. So that's an experienced paramedic who's got a degree, who's gone on to master's education. And if they complete that education full-time, it's a year. If they do it part-time, it's 3 years. And those advanced paramedic practitioners with a master's degree, increasingly we're seeing a non-conveyance rate, some 35 to 40% higher than a regular paramedic crew. So what that means is that we're able to safely close off episodes of care in the community, not respond with a double-staffed ambulance, not convey the patient to the emergency department, where, of course, we know that if they present at the emergency department, there's a higher likelihood of admittance. And once they're admitted, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to get stuck in a bed and it's going to be a delayed discharge, which creates all sorts of other difficulties. So we are essentially transforming the way we deliver our service here in Wales, looking to tip the service model on its head. Essentially, instead of responding to the majority of 999 calls, emergency calls we receive every day, we want to flip that. So we only go to those patients who really, really need a double-staffed paramedic emergency ambulance quickly. Car crashes, broken legs, falls from height, those kind of things, cardiac arrest and so on. And the rest we would service either by way of telephone or video advice upstream with clinicians in our contact centres or with advanced practice clinicians in the community. Of course, many of those advanced practice clinicians also then go on to be independent paramedic prescribers, offering us other opportunities to close more patients safely in the community.
So that's exactly what I hoped you would say, Jason, and those are exactly the lessons that we need to pay attention to here in the US, and I want to drill deeper into those in a second. But first, we need to stop for a message from our sponsor.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back. Remember that EMS One-Stop is not only a podcast, but also a vlog. So not only can you hear us on the platform that you're listening to us on, you can also see us on YouTube. And the advantage of doing that is that during the course of discussions with my guests, we have visuals, charts, images, really to convey what we're talking about. And obviously, I'm talking to my guest, Jason Killens, today, Chief Executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust. And so if you're watching us, then there are some fantastic slides and images that Jason and his team have provided. If you're listening to us, then go and click over onto YouTube. But always, please make sure that you like and subscribe on the platform that you're listening to us on. So if you look at your phone right now, there's a little check mark in the top right-hand corner. If you click that, or if you're on YouTube, you hit the like and subscribe button. It means that A, we capture you, and B, you get notified when a new episode of EMS One-Stop is published again. Almost got that out in one take, Jason. So talking to Jason Killens, we were having an amazing discussion before the break about sort of the breakdown of the services. And, you know, you're doing what we all really want to do. We mentioned the emergency triage, treat and transport program, ET3 here in the US. The rug was pulled out from under that. It doesn't stop us doing these things, which is actually doing what you guys are really doing, which is giving the patient the treatment they need, and not just the one-size-fits-all, one-stop shop, you call, we haul. But, of course, this is a journey for you, as you were saying in the break.
Yeah, it is very much a journey, Rob. I mean, you know, the traditional emergency ambulance service, a model that we've all been operating for decades now, you know, it is simply unsustainable going forwards, particularly here, you know, where we've got an aging population. We know that, you know, an aging population lives longer with, complex conditions, comorbidities in their communities, and they access urgent and emergency care more frequently. So that's leading to increases in activity, and that activity is more complex. So the current model of response and convey to an emergency department is simply not sustainable. And I'm really clear that the answer to the quality, the safety, the response time performance challenges we have here, particularly in Wales, is not about more double-staffed ambulances. It's about change, and it's about innovating and transforming the way we deliver care. We're not transport organisations anymore, which we were 20 and 30 years ago. We do transport, but increasingly we're providers of great clinical care in our communities, and it's that bit that we're looking to stretch and grow, so we provide better outcomes for our patients here in Wales, and only convey them to the emergency department when we really need to. And we think the solution to that is advanced practice in communities with our own people and others. You know, increasingly with a growing nursing workforce, we've got about 200 nurses which work for us now, predominantly in 111, but also in the 999 service too. And we see, you know, a growing multidisciplinary advanced practice clinical service as the solution to those challenges we've got.
Excellent. So part of that journey, of course, is getting the appropriately trained, qualified, certified practitioner in role. And again, it's another heated, storming debate here in the US of degrees for medics. Okay, there's certain parts of our world over here that say we can't afford to take the time to have a stand down to get everybody qualified, certified, and a degree. There are others that are absolutely saying that, yes, we need to have a degree level practitioner doing the job. And now, of course, for the last at least probably 15 years, I would say that the UK and England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland have gone down the graduate program. So what's the career pathway look like for someone that's going to go to a university and start their life in ambulance services?
Yeah, okay. So look, it's a really good question, but I would just offer, I think there's a third way too, okay, which is to do both. And perhaps I'll just unpack that a bit and explain.
Yeah, please do.
So, you're right. You know, for the last 15 or 20 years, predominantly recruitment of paramedics has been through the university route. You know, so we recruit from universities qualified paramedics with a degree. But I would say this, I'm an advocate of this, you know, because right. I was a technician, I was an EMT, you know, there is, I think, a vocational pathway which we must maintain to ensure we've got workforces that are genuinely reflective of the communities that we serve. Because if you only recruit through the university route, there are some people in our communities, which you automatically cut off because they can't afford to go to university. They're not in the right geographical place to access university. They haven't got the prerequisite education to enter university, but they would make fantastic paramedics, and clinicians in our ambulance services. So we maintain a vocational pathway to paramedic qualification as well. So a technician can convert in service to a qualified paramedic with a degree. Now, so we support part-time release with one of our universities to be able to acquire that qualification over time. But once they're a paramedic, the pathway is then the same as it would be for a direct entry paramedic, let me say. And there's a number of routes they can go now. So when I joined, nearly 30 years ago, you were a paramedic on the road or you were a paramedic in education, in training.
Yeah.
But of course now you can be a paramedic on the road. You can be a senior paramedic on the road. So that's a higher pay band, supervisory responsibilities, slightly more skills. Here in Wales, you could be what we call a Cymru high acuity response unit paramedic. So these are people that are tasked, kind of clues in the title, to the more acute work, particularly around cardiac arrest, pit crew kind of management of those incidents. We've implemented that service in the last 12 months, and we're already seeing improving ROSC rates coming out of that, which is great. So you can be in education, you can be on the road as a senior paramedic or a high acuity response unit paramedic. You can go into operational management and still be a jobbing paramedic. You could go into our hazardous area response team and be a jobbing paramedic. Go into big fires, building collapses, entrapments, all that kind of stuff. You could be a paramedic in our clinical support desk, in our contact centres, or in the 111 service. And of course, increasingly, particularly post-registration here in the UK, that's what, now 15 or so years ago, paramedics are now working in other bits of the National Health Service and the private sector too. So traditionally, if you're a paramedic, your employer was an ambulance service. That's not necessarily the case anymore. We've got paramedics working in police custody suites, in emergency departments, in other bits of the NHS, in primary and community care as well. So for a degree educated paramedic, the opportunities are substantial now, whereas 2 decades ago they weren't.
Excellent. And I'm glad you qualified the direct entry route there, Jason. And of course, we must always, reflect the population in which we serve. We've started actually in the US a number of, they call them earn while you learn programs. And it's probably not on the scale of getting a full-on degree, but of course, it's a start point. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. In terms of the other folk that support you, we mentioned that fire brigades don't have a full-time medical first response responsibility, but you have other types of responders that are also working in and around you and in Wales.
We do, and that picture's the same across the UK. It varies by service, but they certainly are. I mean, so here in Wales, we've got probably just shy of 1,000 volunteers. So these are community first responders. So these are people that we train, equip, and activate to certain codes within the MPDS determinants, and they respond within their communities to those calls. They go in addition to an ambulance, but they do respond, and they provide great care to patients, often arriving much quicker than the traditional road ambulance, because they're in the communities where the job is occurring. You've mentioned fire services, so we've got co-responder schemes with the fire services here in Wales and across the UK. And in some services, London, where I used to work, there are also co-responder schemes with the police, where they respond to certain types of calls, certain categories of calls, and other services, ambulance services across the UK also have co-responder relationships with the military. So from military bases, we've got one here in Wales too, where they also respond in addition to the traditional NHS ambulance. So a mixture of different services responding in communities to make those communities more resilient and ultimately get better outcomes for our patients.
That's excellent. Certainly in my old area in the UK, we had the military first responders, and we had all of the remembering the firearms situation and who carries a gun in police departments around the UK, the armed response units that were area vehicles were all trained in what we then called FPOS, first person on scene. And so they were able to attend traffic collisions and obviously cardiac arrests, etc. I remember the day I went to a cardiac arrest to find a Nomex cladded, suited, full tactical response unit with a defibrillator out, and I'm not sure if they caused more shock with their appearance or with the clinical treatment. But the point was they were there and they responded, and that was fantastic. In terms of sort of other initiatives and things, obviously as the chief executive, I've known you for many years. Jason, you're a great visionary. What's next for the service?
Well, that's a really good and leading question, Rob. So we've just taken the decision here with our trust board. So I suppose I should just explain what a trust board is.
Yes, sorry, let me go back one. Yes, of course, you have a degree of governance. You said you report to the minister, but of course you have a board.
Yes, we do. We do have a board. So the board is made up of executive directors, so salaried directors, and also an equivalent number of non-executive directors who are drawn from the community with, specific expertise, so finance expertise, corporate governance expertise, commercial expertise, and so on. And that trust board essentially is the peak governance committee, if you like, of the organisation to make sure that I and my direct reports as the executive team, discharge our functions properly. We have good governance processes in place. We spend public money wisely, those kind of things. But we've just agreed with our trust board that when our medical director retires at the end of this year, we will not replace him. Now, we'll be the first ambulance service in the UK not to have a medical director on their peak governance trust board. Instead here, we will have our senior clinical leadership provided by our executive director of paramedicine. We're the first ambulance service in the UK to have that role on the board, and through our executive director of nursing and quality and safety. And we've taken that view simply because the paramedic profession has developed, as we've been discussing during this session. It's developed over the last 2 decades to the point now where we believe we've got sufficiently experienced senior clinicians in the paramedic workforce that are able to provide that, senior level governance, leadership and direction for our clinical strategy. We'll be able to pull on support from doctors, medical doctors, as we need it. We'll still have access to medical doctors as an organisation, but I think and the board thinks it's an important signal and message to our paramedic workforce that the glass ceiling, if you like, Rob, is broken now. And paramedics who join us, 21, 22 from university can absolutely see a pathway through to senior leadership, to a director on the board, and ultimately to jobs like mine as a paramedic, if that's what they aspire to. So we're really pleased that we've been able to make this kind of exciting step. And I'm not being disparaging to the medical doctors' support over many years to the ambulance service, but we've reached a point in maturity, we think now, in the paramedic profession where we can do that.
I don't think it's disparaging at all. In the last 20 or so minutes, we've discussed and described the career pathway and the educational requirements, even if you've come in from street level, EMT level, through to, as you say, your desk. It's one of those, where do you see yourself in 20 years? I see yourself sitting in Jason's chair. So you've described that pathway and that route to the top. So it probably makes excellent sense that now you have, as you say, come of age, and it's time to actually have your people leading.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. We've got to agree. Our director of paramedicine, a guy called Andy Swinburne, was a job in paramedic many years ago. He's worked in 3 or 4 services across the UK. He's an excellent guy, got loads of, of passion and vision, not only for the workforce, so individual clinicians, but also for the service and how we can deliver care in a much better, smarter way, closer to home for our patients. So it's an exciting journey we're going on.
Wonderful. And so I'm going to ask my classic ending question, Jason. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask or anything you need to tell us? I
don't think so, Rob. We've we've been through a bit of a tough time here in the last 3 years, as most organisations have.
And I don't think there is any EMS system ambulance service in the world that hasn't, honestly.
Absolutely right. But as we've come out of that, what we've realised is our people have done fantastic stuff over the last 2 and 3 years. Taking personal risk and placing themselves in danger, as our people always do. And we're extremely proud of everything that they've done over the last 3 years. But now is the time, as we emerge from that pandemic, particularly with, the legacy of the pandemic across our health system, and that increased activity and the challenges around risk and safety. Now is the time to grasp the transformational agenda and set our organisations up for the next decade or two with new models of service delivery.
You know what? That's inspirational, Jason, because what I just heard there is that you took the pandemic and obviously the lessons that were identified during that and said, hey, we now need to shape ourselves going forward. And that's actually something that the US can take from this discussion. If you take nothing else, obviously we are busily switching off things that were on during the public health emergency, saying that's it, that's the end of that. Sounds like you and yours are actually taking that and stepping up, not stepping back. And I commend you for that.
Thank you.
So that's another edition of EMS One-Stop. Of course, Jason, I know you're an active social media person. So how can we follow you and, of course, your organisation?
Well, you can get me and the organisation on, I was going to say Twitter, but it's X now, isn't it?
I haven't quite got my head around X yet. So yes, X Twitter.
You can get me on X Twitter at Jason Killens and the organisation at Welsh Ambulance.
Okay, so at Jason Killens, thank you, sir. And I hope that we can continue to follow the success and the progress of the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust. I know that you are a very visible guy, and I will stay in touch and follow up. And perhaps in a wee while, you can come back and give us a progress report.
Very happy to do so.
Okay, so that was, as I said, another edition of EMS One-Stop. Thank you very much to Jason Killens. Thank you very much to his team. If you're watching on YouTube, the amazing graphics and visuals that you've been looking at are courtesy of Jason's hardworking team there. So until next time, I've been Rob Lawrence. Don't forget you can follow me on LinkedIn. Just look me up, or on Twitter at UKRobL1. I'm there. If you have any comments or observations, please leave them in the chat or the comments box on the platform that you're listening or watching us on. So until next time, this has been EMS One-Stop. Bye for now.